They'll blanket you in Wi-Fi and profit off the radiation. Congregation collecting the people for that Satan. I keeps it blazing, cause I can read between the lines. I ain't blind, we unwind what they're really saying. Genetically modify what you're tasting. Don't need that cottage promise, so now you live up in your mom's basement. Redesign time so your mind is always wasted. Programmed to crave the basics. Keep the beta in stasis. Pay the state, kid. You're in debt for being born. Messengers are more than just the price for being warned. Don't be alarmed. Disconnect from their machinations. Stop subscribing to the folly of own nations. Bone breaking ain't the answer, cause they seek the ownership of souls. Spread the seeds and watch them grow. Break the chains of control. Break the chains of control.
Sweet eternal balance of all that is good, true, and beautiful, friends. Tonight on Rogue Ways, we get to dive into one of my favorite areas of expertise. This is not what I wrote. Sorry. I'm going to pause live and ask this to refresh. Hold up. Author's gonna author.
This is live. This is live here. There's no teleprompter here.
Yeah. But while I'm waiting, I'll say hi to Logan and Lacey in the chat and anyone else. Mateo, who wants to pop up and say hello. Yeah, I don't know about everyone else, but my electronics have been especially strange today. Like, exceptionally weird. Okay, we got it now. We got the right one.
From the top.
Starting over. 3, 2, 1, go. Sweet eternal balance of all that is good, true, and beautiful, friends. Returning to Rogue Ways is our resident naturist who loves to help us dive into all new territory, or in tonight's case, well-worn territory, but from new perspectives. He is a wise and sagacious traveler of the inner world and the realm of thoughtful reflection who writes for many publications and produces tracts and treatises and content galore, as well as running his own school of the revolutionarily radical flavor. The man with the power to revolutionize our society and bring us back to our own true center, the educator and writer, the philosopher and thinker, John Coleman. Welcome back once again to Rogue Ways. How are you doing tonight?
Good, Lindsay. Thank you so much for your generous welcome here.
Absolutely. It's always good to have you. This is becoming a trend, and I'm glad for it. And I do want to give a moment for this weekend. We just had our One Day of Brightness event with all the Rogue Warriors out there who attended. It was so good. I can never express enough. Like, it's difficult to even put into words what even happens and how awesome it really is, but it was incredible as always. And I'm really grateful to everyone who participated, everyone who came, all of our master teachers and practitioners, all of the soul-centered participants from all over the world who are there from many walks of life. It's always so awesome to see people just lift themselves up and really connect together on this like very vulnerable and beautiful level. And there's so much healing that happens, and so much, it's just, again, I could talk about it all I want, but you really don't know unless you're there and you experience it. And the people who have been there experience it know they've got that gnosis. And so if you want that level of understanding of what I'm even trying to describe and failing at, then come to the next One Day of Brightness. This will be at the autumnal equinox, or near as we can get, while still accommodating people's schedules. So it'll be on September 26th. And I hope to see everybody there. It's just really, really like indescribably beautiful and wonderful, and you will never ever regret going. You get far, far, far more than your money's worth by doing it. Anybody who goes agrees on all of those things. So anyways, I just wanted to give that a shout out. And also, I've been getting really amazing feedback on my most recent book, All Endings Are Beginnings. Such a fun book, such a great book, and I'm just hearing from people it's a good coffee book table. They're saying it's a good conversation starter. You remember when we used to have those books? I don't know if you had these, John, but they were like the what if books or the would you rather books. Did you ever play with those when you were like younger?
You're not saying those are like the choose your own adventure. This is different?
No, this is different. This is like they were meant to be conversation starter sort of pieces, and so you could flip to any page and it'd be like, would you rather have $1 million or 20 billion dogs? I don't know. I can't think of one, but you know, like it was.
Yes, I think the 1990s were good for that sort of thing. I do know this sort of genre.
So I'm getting back from people that it's kind of like that, but like way deeper. You could like pick it up and like point it, one of the pages and read it, and it'd be like a conversation starter. So that was really cool to hear. And then, like I'm saying, it's like a God shot oracle. You can flip to a page and be like, okay, this was my message I needed to hear today. So anyways, I wanted to share my gratitude for people who are sharing those feedbacks, pieces, and also purchasing and supporting the show through that purchase. And you can grab your ticket to the next One Day of Brightness or this book or so many other things on rogueways.org in the shop, and find ways to support yourself and the show and the world and all of that. And finally, John, the pointless question of the episode for you.
Go on.
What is the worst thing that you could see on the side of a road?
A man, I suppose.
Ooh, just wait, like just a guy standing there, like. Hey.
Well, maybe a guy in the streets in a difficult situation.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
That's a good question. I suppose that's a
good answer.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'm like thinking like I always see dead animals and then I cry, even though I have no connection to these animals at all. Like, these poor animals died.
I came across one such one today, and I was gonna say that too, but I guess that's a good second or third place there.
Yeah, a human in dire straits is way worse than a dead random animal. So I like your answer better. And I guess
we're still hunting for the turtle that took off some of my ears, so I wouldn't mind that one to be run over.
Dude, that'd be so cool if you found it. I lost a lizard once, and I found it a year later sitting on my toilet. I was like, well, hello again. Nice to see you. I hope you've been well. Your tail is quite fat, so I think you have been. Speaking of things dead on the side of the road, is our republic dead on the side of the road?
Oh, golly. The latest incarnation is we can get into the different American setups over the years, but I think a certain line's been crossed, at least in this latest avatar.
The point of no return has been crossed. This was an idea that you posit in your essay, for lack of a better word, an American Journal of Days, or the conservative washout, which is the centerpiece of our discussion tonight, is that there is no return from what has gone on politically in the last year or so, or 2 or 5 or more, hundreds. I don't know. Where are we going?
Fair. Yeah, that's it. I mean, we can get into the nitty gritty as we go along here, but we really could look at structurally almost 3 different Americas. And for some reason, Americans are very uncomfortable talking about this. There being 3 or 4 even American systems. The French are in their 5th republic. They don't seem to have a concern about this. The Mexicans are about in their 20th republic by now. But for some reason, American mythology is so bellied up to 1776, and we can't admit that, no, that died in 1860. That died in early February of 1860. The Congress was put on hold. Then you have your Civil War. Then you have your incorporation of DC, which has kind of gotten popularized in the past couple of years. And then even that, the United States corporation, even that by the 1960s is pretty much done. And you have the full-blown admiralty. But what makes this last couple months unusual, or this Rubicon that we've crossed, I feel, is that there's no pretense any longer of the republic. That's what it is to me. It's so manifest that that shows a demarcation.
The illusion is completely done away with, except what's strange is so many people are still caught in the illusion. Like, people can't even see it as obvious as it has become.
Yeah, that's the weird thing. What was the parallel I was thinking about today? I think it was a parallel to some other historical thing, and it was, and why isn't there a pushback now? Because I perceived, and of course I can't think of what was the actual incident in the past. But I think the powers that be have concluded with possibly solid footing that nothing they can do now is going to really elicit any response. So you might as well just make it open, right? I mean, the Iraqi insurgents only had to fight from the shadows until they were strong enough to hold cities, or in Vietnam. You only have to be conspiratorial as long as you're in a certain position of weakness. When you're in a position of strength, you don't need to hide any longer.
Which is part of why so many more people, like, we have this mass awakening at the same time as we have this mass deepening of the delusion too. But, the fact that they don't have to hide as much, or that they're more brazen now, might be why so many more people are waking up. And at the same time, what can we even hope for at this point, right? And maybe we can get into that later. But I even the whole like, oh, the emperor has no clothes. I feel like that doesn't even really work because it's more like, the emperor is actually a giraffe and the giraffe is like drowning in a pool and there's like monkeys throwing like shit at him and I don't know, and there's like aliens swooping in and bombs exploding and people are saying like, no, none of that's happening at all, you crazy person. You're like, it's right there. Like it's all right there. None of it's even hidden. There's no veil to hide behind. Like it's all really obvious and people are just like, no, nothing's happening. And it's really weird. It's surreal.
That's the word. That's the word. It's surreal is the word. There was a funny photograph. Maybe it was doctored. Maybe they used an interesting lens, but it was of Jimmy Carter and his wife, and then Mr. Biden and Mrs. Biden.
Yeah.
And you may have seen this. The couple look of the older president. They look smaller, and then the pretenders look very big.
Giant. Like massively unrealistically giant. I was like, who's photoshopping this and putting it out like it's real?
And I tend to think it was Photoshop too. But regardless, someone really had fun with it. And we talked about the word surreal, Lindsay. And someone, they put in like, and the little pictures in the background, they filled in, all of just the crazy stuff, whether it's like BLM riots or Hunter Biden or Donald Trump, or it's all wacky. It's all wacky. And someone had fun with that, but we're just living like within a meme wrapped within a UFO, as you say, wrapped in this, that, and the other. It's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, and even, a lot of people will argue this, not many people in this community, but a lot of people will argue this, that, we should be wearing masks to stop coronavirus for some reason. But even to the fact that I just feel like they're all laughing behind a, like pile of money somewhere. Like, we look at them motherfuckers wear these masks everywhere. Like, haha, we got them. And people are happily still wearing them, even after they get their experimental medication injected and all of this is done, they're still wearing them. And I don't know if they're ever going to stop. And it's like the mind control feels pretty complete.
Yeah. I mean, it's, I know people, kind of whisper this or kind of had some fun with, it's almost like a script, but it really is almost at this point like a show. I mean, they killed Baghdadi. They ran the same season they did when they killed bin Laden. They ran. It's like a character. I mean, it's the same stuff, and even now it's so open with the mask you mentioned. You'll go into a place and they'll say, nominally it's for a scientific reason, but they'll just say now if it makes you feel better.
It's a symbol. It's a symbol of compliance. It's a symbol of caring about your fellow man. I'm like, no, it's a symbol of raping my face of the ability to have oxygen inhaled through it. Like, it's not anything but degradation. I can speak.
Yeah, and with the mask or with various characters that are run, we can have some fun with the names that are run in the press. There's the script, so to speak. I see, and part of the late election is overall a retreat from rationality into emotion, into just, as I say, memes, into just the shadows on the walls, the shadows of the shadows.
Yeah.
That's, I guess, for me, the meta of everything.
And the happiness in those shadows. Like, oh, we want our shadows. Don't even try and tell us about the outside. That is too dangerous. It's too much. I like that one of the sections in this piece that we're kind of discussing around, it's sort of the center of our talk tonight, which I shared, was called The American Journal of Days, or The Conservative Washout. I like that you had a section that was sort of subtitled The Crowned and Conquering Child. And maybe we touched on this a little bit last night. I can't remember, because I've also been talking about this recently, where like, I don't think that Aleister Crowley was talking about an actual child being crowned. People were kind of like always talking about, what could this mean? What could it be? Maybe there's going to be the Antichrist as a little kid, or maybe it's going to be like these creepy movies or whatever, where this little kid is super evil and he's going to be crowned conqueror of the world. And I'm like, no, I think it's that we're all, meant to be these baby babies wearing diapers and like, you know, tooting around and just like, give me my stuff and like, I'm gonna throw a fit. And you know, when we're this emotional wreck over the tiniest little things and we can't do anything for ourselves, and what
Mm.
else are we?
Yeah, that's it. And it's as we parse things out this evening, Lindsay, one of the killing parts is how long this has been going on. And I think some people have done some good work laying that out somewhat. Uh, but also, maybe a sub basement to that little hell is the fact of how long we've accepted the principles of what's happening. So now you have some people that are somewhat wise to the legal person, although a lot of that information is getting outdated very quick. Um, and they're kind of getting wise to the digital person, and now you don't really have to talk about the straw man anymore because people understand like accounts online. It's probably easier to talk about that than a straw man at this point, for most people. And then they're talking about the digital person or whatever. But you see, we've accepted the principles going back generations in our own lives, the way we rear our children. And because we've accepted the principles, even in the kernel, now we're seeing the fruit. We're getting angry at the fruit. And uh, that leads to my mood, shall we say.
Yeah, that's a really good point of like how long this game has been going on, and that's how always have to go back to this, like how cunningly devious it all is. Like you thought of these things how many hundreds or thousands of years ago in order to put the things in motion, put the wheels in motion to get us to this point, and none of that was by accident.
Mm.
And how stunning, really, and unfortunately, truly amazing, like commendable if it were good, but not good at all. Um, and that idea of accepting these principles so far back that have led to these, you know, current iterations that you can't ungrow the fruit, right? It's there, it's gonna fall and rot, or you're gonna eat it, and but it's there either way now. And you know, we were talking recently with Phoenix Aurelius about axioms, and I think it was on his show actually, so it might not even be out yet. But we were talking about axioms and the idea that there are these things underlying math, you know, even and science,
Mm.
that we have to accept as true with no evidence or proof at all, right? And then we build this whole system on top of it, and it kind of reminds me of that. It's like the very basic things we've accepted as true. We've now built these empires on, and
Mm.
nobody looks at those basic assumptions. No, everybody just accepts them as like, well, yeah, I mean, why would we be doing things this way if this wasn't just the way that was the best way to do the things? And like, why would you even question the thing? And how difficult is it to even find like what those axioms are politically and socially that have led to this rotten fruit and these rotten empires? If any of that
Yeah,
makes
and
sense.
I'm sure you've had the experience, I certainly have in my own way, of explaining to someone who's somewhat open-minded on this, that, or the other point of a very fractal area that we inhabit. And the part of that is, well, I think the first thing is most people will go to a certain point and they'll back out. I've seen that very often happen, whether it's education, the legal stuff, whatever, my little interest and all that stuff, or 9/11 or whatever. Uh, but then you have another dynamic of, you talk of these empire of lies. Then you have the reality, because part of it's the same reality, really. Is the people who back out, they realize that if they have some integrity, they have to act on it, and they're not up to it. um but then there's also, within a lot of these worlds, there are sometimes kernels that's great, axioms that are themselves in error, or they're tied to other earlier errors. And so even the opposition, I'm not talking about controlled that's a different subject. But rather just we've kind of planted our feet on something, and maybe it's not as solid even as we thought it was. And I almost feel, I think about this so often in any movement, and as we've spoken to, there's been various ones I've involved myself in, and it's almost like you get into this and you kind of have a broad horizon that opens up, but then you realize a lot of the people in those movements themselves aren't questioning the axioms they're in, and that's the really anxious part, or teeth grinding part or whatever.
Yeah, we're just gnashing our teeth at these things. It's also, you find, I think, a lot of times that these people who are in a lot of these movements were controlled opposition, or were placed there intentionally, or helped to rise within the ranks intentionally, so that specific movement would never get much ground or go anywhere, would just fall apart, or if it did get anywhere, that there'd be some nicely placed internal bombs that would go off at the right time to just throw everything off track. It's really, really hard when you do any of this work for very long, because you come across these exact, very well, again, thought out and well laid plans of the empire.
Yes, I mean, going back to a point that we left off on our initial talk about education, just as an example, and I bring it up once again for everyone's benefit, homeschoolers are being deliberately allowed to be sloppy. And I would be very careful about, to use your language, and it's fine language, that time bomb going off, because when that goes off, that whole thing is going to come down real fast. So that's just one little theater there to connect points and put things together. But that's the case, and you can see that in 100 other ways.
Yeah, that's a really good point that you had made in that episode, and again today, that I had never even considered. I was like, we're free in this way, let's take it and run with it. And now I'm like, oh, they're gonna come, because we've seen them come, and you mentioned this in your article too, for children, and taking them away for reasons far less substantive than even a not high enough standards in your homeschooling curriculum or something like that, right? So we know that they're not above that, and they've done it before, and so why wouldn't they do it again? Why wouldn't they do it en masse and sort of be able to point to all of this? This is kind of random, but I remember not that long ago there was a family in California who, I don't know, they had like 11 or 13 kids or something, which we already are taught to think of as just like kind of horrendous and like, what's wrong with these people, so they're already like weird. And then they were presented to us as homeschoolers, and so that was meant to seem very strange too. And then we found out that they changed their children to their beds sometimes, and they wouldn't let them out of the house, and then it was just sort of dropped. We had this whole article about it. It was a big spectacle. Everybody was meant to look and say, oh my God, this family is horrible. People who homeschool are so bad and rotten, and look at them. They're chaining their children to beds, and it's evil. Never heard from it again. Who knows what even happened? Who knows if it was even real? But we just get this like dropped into our, just like all of the media shenanigans that were so intense over the past few years, of just complete propaganda and bullshit. And once it's there, it's fact in people's minds. That's a fact now. You cannot argue it.
Yes. It doesn't matter that David Koresh wasn't abusing the children. It doesn't matter, because you just have to put it out there. It doesn't matter that the princesses of Kuwait weren't, that they were the nurses that were crying about the incubator. It doesn't matter that was all made up. It doesn't matter that dude at the fake Boston massacre. Obviously, you don't put a guy with blown off legs sitting in a wheelchair.
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. To the subject of my article, it doesn't matter if there are thousands of men who put in affidavits over what they've seen in this country about all the finagling in the ballots, and in broad daylight, paper shredding trucks coming up and nailing up windows when the ballot counting is going on, and that the Republican delegates go and they're locked. It doesn't matter, because all that, and this is getting to the point where they don't need to be covert any longer. They just need to declare it on their news media. And it is. It
just is. And that's the crazy part too, when you try to present anything to somebody and you're like, well, did you know that, I don't know, anything, this happened? And they're like, well, no, it didn't. I would have seen it on the news. Or like, no, it didn't, because the news told me the opposite happened. I'm like, that same news source that you are talking about, that you trust, had this retraction, or had this later update, or had this, no, I would know. Like, I'll show it to you. Like, no, it's not true. Like, it's just, that's all it took, was them saying it once. Doesn't matter, like you said.
Yeah, it's the first impression. That's it.
And they can do all the retractions they want. No one ever sees that, if they even get to the point where they do a retraction, which, like you said, why would they? Yeah, I like that you pointed out, too, in the Time article, the Secret History, and the New Yorker article, Forced to Choose, where they just laid it out. Like, well, yeah, we did do a lot of manipulating this election, but we had to, and here's how we did it. And people were like, woohoo, look at how they manipulated the election. I'm like, what? You're cheering for this? You like this? I'm like, okay.
Yeah, I would encourage people who are interested in this subject to read those articles once again from Time, and then more lately Liz Cheney's piece in the New Yorker, and it's just admitted there. Is it the bombshell a lot of people who just read headlines and on our neck of the woods kind of ran with? Not quite, but it's enough of a smirking admission that it's not just a crazy idea or whatnot. And it's almost like with the this type of sand eating grin, shall we say. They're denying it, but they're so cocksure the agenda and so forth. I mean, get into maybe certain factions of that down the line. uh but it's almost like, the criminal has to go back to the scene of the crime. They have to just be
Get their
cocky about
trophy.
it. Yes, exactly. They have to get the trophy, exactly. And that's kind of how I saw those pieces.
Yeah. Yeah, it was like a bragging, like, haha, look what we did. And look how we can tell you, and look how you'll love it.
And we couldn't even wait a month to do it. We couldn't even sit on
Yeah.
it for a month. Like in the old days, they used to wait on this stuff like a decade or two, and then
Yeah.
they'd have a book or some deathbed confession. They couldn't even sit on it for a month.
That's so ridiculous. I just love this quote because you say, and life goes on, but it does so like in a Hangover or a David
Oh,
Lynch movie. Like that is what I feel like I'm in a David Lynch movie. Like this has to be insanity. This can't be real. I'm in a coma or something. Or like, no, this is the clown show. Welcome to the clown show.
yeah. The that's the word there. And now I must confess, and will be a little bit informal here, but my original title was not the American Journal of Days. My editor, who's also my colleague at the school, had some sense about him and some sobriety more so than myself. And so my actual title, just between you and I, was How Willie Brown's Concubine Became President.
I love it. She's
Um,
also whose arm was she on at the fucking Grammys or something? I can't remember.
oh,
Someone in the
really?
chat might remember. Yeah, it's
Oh,
ridiculous.
that's interesting. Yeah, that I give you you gave me that, and maybe I'll throw back the envelopes. Are you familiar with the envelopes?
No.
Okay, we'll get there. Make a note of the envelopes, would you? Um, but in any case, it is called subtitle the conservative washout, and there is an aspect absolutely of that. And uh, with part of this Lynchian aspect of things, for me, and this may not be the case for yourself, and it may not be the case for many of the audience, uh, and I don't think my article is incomprehensible to someone of some outside of the conservative world. I don't know if that would properly even fit me, but
Yeah.
um, in any case, someone I'm certainly sympathetic to that, maybe on a sentimental level, just because of my background and family and whatever. But that's what I saw flopping around this past autumn. That what was it? Stupid and ham-fisted. That type of Rush Limbaugh, old America, 1776, 1950s, whatever there was of truth or goodness in that ethos, for all many errors to it. Whatever was in that old narrative of America, uh, and of that independence and yada yada yada. We can hash out what that is, but that's what I see as this Lynchian aspect. That's done, and now for me, what remains is uh, just naked admiralty, naked administration by bureaucrats. A technocrat is a word that's gotten very popular in the last year. That's fair. But even the pretense of a society based on a certain individuality and whatever, pulling yourself up by your bootstraps or whatever is attractive in that, and I do believe there's something to that outlook, that's through now.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's unfortunately replaced with just an extreme amount of self-abdication of responsibility at every single level, and a really strong desire for people to just glob into whatever group, the safety of the group, and the group think, group mind, which we
Yeah, and
already
that's
had, but it's like just so potent now.
yeah, that's it, and that's across the board. um this is something I perceived, and also leads to a certain, not personal melancholy, I hope people understand, but just looking at things, and I'm actually fine,
Okay.
but just in appraising the field of things, that's certainly melancholy for me. Um, you just hit on it. I think a major aspect is a trend which had been across the board, every political spectrum and outside of politics. Everyone is so isolated. We don't, this is the mourning I have for what happened this past fall, is that whatever was flimsy and exaggerated and weak in this old narrative of America, which I feel died lately, that at least provided some superficial connection, right? This type of waspy, individual enlightenment type of Protestant thing, uh, capitalist kind of go-getter, whatever language fails. I hope people understand kind of where I'm shooting, in what direction.
Yeah.
That's gone, and so all that remains now are little groups on Facebook and little sects and factions and splits within the factions of every aspect of society. There is not even a pretense of a common culture at this point, and those in the levers of power are happy just to keep cranking and breaking that division more and more.
Yes, because as we know, it's like oversaid at this point, but it's so true that divided we fall. If we have nothing with which to unite around it all, or nothing to see our neighbors or each other as part of the same sort of whole, that we have to find some way to like unite together and get through whatever life is. What do we have at all? And we have a really easily picked apart and discarded pile of random humans. Like, we're nothing alone and separate from one another. And whatever, like you said, I think we both and everyone in this audience understands that we're not saying that like the way things have always been is the best way for things to be, and like there's no problems that ever existed. But it's hard to make the argument that there shouldn't be some level of like, I don't know if nationalism is even the right word, but some level of like community at a mass scale where you do understand and feel that this is my larger group, whatever it's called, America, United States, like the land of the free, the home of the brave, whatever you want to call it. That's my group, and we're here, and this is kind of what we're doing and what we're about, and here's our borders, and this is the way we do things. Like, some level of identity at that level is necessary for cohesiveness, like to move forward, to get anything done.
Yeah, I mean, I see that in a microcosm just with my work with the college. I routinely, even just in the past couple of weeks, I routinely lose students or lose possible guests because they're been trained in such a way. A lot of these, and if you're gonna consider apocastastases, if you've gotten enough to get in touch with me and so forth, they're usually people who kind of understand there's a certain BS aspect in the system, to a certain extent.
Yeah.
And it's these people who have a certain grounding. Our training, this is so bad. Our training from the media, and that's really one of the major whipping boys, and more than whipping boys, I have in my article, is so bad. Even amongst people who are kind of woke to what's going on, I'll lose people on the left and on the right that I'm constantly in contact with. They don't want to do the show anymore. They don't want to come because they'll see something or they hear a word. They're so triggered. I know that's another overused word.
Yeah.
But we are so factionalized that even people, we should have nothing in common, or we should have nothing that I've ever perceived that would prevent these works that I'm intimating in my own day to day,
right,
going to pass. But we are so on a hair trigger that if we just hear a statement and we perceive it as being different than our ideology, that I can't have anything to do with that. And it's weird because even in some of the conversations we've had, they're all over the board.
Yeah.
I guess I'm Mr. Conservative now. That wasn't the case the past two things.
Yeah.
And the first show, it was something else.
Yeah.
And that's how everyone else is. But we're so locked into the darn thing that it's really something else. And you had said, yes. If I could just conclude with a larger point, I gave you the intimate or the individual there. I hope that what has happened which I do see as this point of no return. I hope those of us in the research world, the alternative world of whatever denomination, um, I hope we can also analyze a lot of the principles that we've operated on. And you mentioned this idea of a certain unity. You got to give the devil his due. That was the point of public schools originally.
True.
And then it wasn't, I know we get kind of caught up in the whole industrial thing and John Rockefeller, and it has this whole economic thing, and it's making public people, and we talked about that. But if you go back originally, that's actually what guys like Horace Mann were trying to do, because they perceived for whatever hiccups they had, we all have hiccups. They perceived that, especially a society such as America, which has no unifying religion, and is very spread out, of course, even in the 19th century. We needed something, and that something was at least a type of matrix of common mythology. And mythology doesn't mean it's made up, but it's there is a reality they were trying to go for, because right now there's none of that, and it's just going to be more chickens going off in every direction.
Yeah. It's definitely a good point. And it's definitely something we could think of if we were going to reclaim the education system as, what myth, what narrative would we like to actually all center around? What goal would we like to aim for? And to make that as sort of flexible as possible while still being unifying would be a pretty amazing challenge that I really like the idea of. But it is interesting, we were talking about how people just like desperately need this label, right? They need to like understand, and so they need to like cast you into this box, and whether it's you or whether it's anything, a movement or a thing that they're seeing, they have to put it in something that they can understand. So I always get this, people people are always like, oh, so you're like a love and light, like hippie bitch, whatever. And I'm like, I don't know. Am I? Like, what does that even mean? Like, and then if I'm ever like, suddenly harsh, like I did this episode when the riots were just sort of starting to break out everywhere, and I was really angry. And the episode is me just like berating everyone. I'm like, what the fuck is wrong with you all? Blah, blah, like, you can't do this. Why are you so stupid? Like, I'm just like using my show as my like therapy box, and I spewing all of this vitriol. And I think I lost a lot of people there because they were like, wait, you're love and light. Why are you yelling? Why are you mad? You can't be like this. That's not spiritual. And I'm like, this is the problem when you try to put people or movements or things in boxes, is they're never one thing, and they're never what you expect. And you have to keep your mind open. When we say have an open mind, we don't just mean question the narrative the media is giving you. We mean literally let everything you encounter be what it is without needing to like reduce it to this like simple thing.
Yes, I've given a fair bit of grief in our time together with great charity towards homeschoolers, but if I can extend equally constructive criticism for the research world, the conspiracy world, something I've noticed, which brushes up against my work, as I've mentioned, is a lot of people who get into this knowledge, alternative knowledge, news, like questioning narratives. A lot of us are very immature in particular with our interaction with the real world. I mean, that's so even the people who see through the things, whatever. I've noticed that too. People don't have that that experience in life, and that's just again part of this large dynamic that we speak of the agenda, but it's not just those people over there. I can see, you can see, based off of just this little incident you mentioned, Lindsay, just the myopia, the myopia of people, and that a lot of that has to come from just atrophied interpersonal skills. We're just not used to that fuller interaction with people.
Yes, and it's really sad. It is somewhat naive, and maybe in that there's like some innocence too, I don't know. But I would really like to invite people to just consider that probably nothing fits in the box that you already had, because you're always growing and moving forward. And so maybe the box needs to get really way bigger, or maybe you need to start just like leaving things like as unlabeled or unidentified fully, and just let them be that. I mean, like, I don't know, so far seems like this. Who knows? We'll see.
Yes, I think a lot of our training from the media, we're almost like abused children or abused animals. to get back to the idea of trauma we've lately spoken of, that we can see through media narratives, and we hear something and it triggers us. It triggers. I know and even right, we like to bitch on the snowflakes and all that, but even in this world, right? If I say, watch out about rabbit holes, right? A lot of people are going to pull back because they know they can see on CNN
Why is
how
he
that's
telling me not to research things? Like,
Yes,
yeah.
exactly. And we're also, and I think this we can talk about January 6th too. We can see like a Pied Piper, a little Pied Piper. And so even those of us who think that we've seen through things, we have also been corralled into places. And one of those places, there's a kernel of truth in a lot of this simulation the media does, right? One of those kernels of truth is there is a danger in an overly intellectual, data-driven approach to things without the interpersonal. So you have people online all day, to put that in layman's term, people online all day just watching videos one after the other. And then Lindsay, a little release there about the riots and watching the bricks dropped off, this, that, and the other. More, what was the saying for the riots? More than peaceful, less than it
Mostly
was
peaceful.
mostly peaceful.
Mostly
Right?
peaceful.
Buildings blowing up, guys with teeth knocked out,
Yeah.
crawling away in the background.
They killed a dog. They went into a pound, pulled the dog out of it, and strangled it. If that was real, if that actually happened.
Or the dogs with the guy with the fake legs blown off, whatever.
Yeah, seriously, I hope so.
But whatever the case may be, there is a kernel of truth in that, just like there is, like, talking about education, there was a certain truth or goodness that explained initial compulsory education, and we can't just let our anger at what the systems become sour that. And then likewise with the whole rabbit hole thing, or 1,000 other places in between, we just need that discernment. I think that's the word. I hope that's what, for all the teeth gnashing from the past couple of months, I hope that is what comes out of things. We really not just see the agendas, but we also analyze a lot of the mistakes we've been making that have led us here as soon as anyone else has brought us to this point.
Yeah, and it's really appropriate to talk about that in terms of that Pied Piper, in the form of, I don't know, maybe Trump, maybe Q at the very least. And how that, drew so many people in. And a lot of us were like, okay, well, let's like do this in a measured way then. Like, let's say like maybe there's some truth here. And if so, why? Why does it exist? And why is it allowed to continue when we know they could shut it down? Or, what might be the purpose of it? Let's look at it from every possible angle instead of just saying like, holy shit, look at how these things sync up. This has to be real. Let's run full force into this and like never give up. Even after everything's said and done, there's still people who are saying that Trump is going to take back the White House in August or something. I don't know.
August 15th. Yeah. Mark your calendars.
Why?
and get the popcorn out. Yeah. I've heard the same stuff.
And being the skeptic I am, I'll never say no for sure that's not happening. I'll say maybe that's possible. It is possible. But I really, really hope everyone sees how unlikely it is. Right? If it happened, it'd be insanity though. Like, wow. We'll see.
Yeah. I mean, that's a whole interesting thing. I really thought, as like I followed things very closely, and as I mentioned to you before, I kind of saw, maybe in a way that others didn't, or at least if they did, they haven't spoken about it. It was almost like watching a drama play out month by month with COVID in the background, and then, as the agenda is very good at doing, pylon by pillar, they knocked out the Trump administration, which was rather anemic in my opinion, but at least it had an aesthetic, and it represented something. And I think there's something to be said for aesthetic. I don't think it's just image, and I think that aesthetic was that old America that we can broadly I can broadly lay out there. But that was the one thing after the other. And how did we get to that point? I lost my train of thought there.
That the Pied Piper is calling people down, and that people
Oh yes,
didn't
yes.
question it and
Yes.
didn't.
And as I watched things, and it picked up pace in November and December. And as I say in the article, I think actually the thing was over. There was no hope for the Trump administration after the 23rd of December, after that shouting match and all that happened there. Everything else, January, that was all postscript. But you have all these retrenchments, and and it got crazier and crazier, and more determined, and the way that the Trump administration was going to beat back the steal got more and more elaborate. And I suppose what we've seen now, which is just the constant retrenchment of when Trump's going to come back, I suppose that's better, because I really thought, Lindsay, that a lot of those crew guys were going to kill themselves. I really thought that was gonna happen. So I'd sooner have the goofiness of, oh yeah, they're all wearing ankle bracelets and this sort of thing, because a lot of people who bellied up to that Q stuff were very decent people.
Yeah, absolutely.
The fall to the earth.
Well, and some of them, to be fair, too, were very balanced about it. Like, well, I don't know, maybe it's all bullshit. Maybe there's a, this is its own false flag sort of thing, or, counter, and whatever I'm trying to say. And but there might be some good in it too. Like, people are waking up to this scourge of pedophilia that afflicts the highest classes throughout history, and these types of things. And so maybe there is something good to it, and I'm like, well, that's fair, right? If you're able to look at it and dive into it and find what you can from it and see what's going on, that's always nice. It's when you just kind of fall flat into it and don't question anything anymore that it gets really dangerous. And I'm really grateful, though, because I also thought that January 6th day was going to be a bloodbath, that people were going to show up just with all that rage of having been dropped, and Trump even seemed to be abandoning them, and nothing was happening, and everything's being stolen, and children's lives are at risk, and just pour all of that into a bloodbath that would be met by even more force than we saw them give to the MOVE bombing and Waco. And I think that's maybe what they wanted, and it didn't happen, and I was very grateful for that. So I don't know how that didn't happen, but thank God enough people apparently had enough critical thinking and presence of mind to just sort of not go that way, not follow the Pied Piper all the way.
Can I ask you this question?
Sure.
The 6th of January, I see that as being very representative, again, of the chaos that's become whatever this neck of the conspiracy world or whatever. And part of that is a certain hysteria or a certain over emotionalism that's come out. And this is a something I'll just hit you with, and I'd like you to push back, or what do you think? Is it wrong, looking at the chaos as a flopping around on the Capitol? I think I opened the essay with that expression. Is it wrong to say that is an out of control feminine spirit within the conspiracy world?
No, I think that's exactly what it is. And I think that's the whole point of demasculizing all of our men, all of our masculine energies in our entire society, at the same time as like pushing up the really toxic sides of femininity and calling it feminism and all of these other things, is that super lopsidedness, and that's part of this crown and conquering child sort of energy, but both, right? The demasculization and the over toxification of femininity. And what you're describing, this emotional, just hyper emotional, and feeling like righteous about that hyper emotionalism, like, oh, I deserve this, and like it should be righteous rage, and I should just like run rampant and not think about anything. And I'm like, how should you? Why would that ever be good? Like, if you're going to say, even with the coup thing, or the I shouldn't say the coup thing, even with the idea that like we're gonna go on January 6th and we're gonna make them do what? What is actually your plan? Do you have one? You don't. So what is this? right?
Yes, it was all the form of manliness, whatever that means, and that, all tatted up, trucks, American flags, Gadsden flags, goatees,
The
uh,
bullhorn guy or whatever.
bullhorn guy, right? It was all the form of masculine energy, but none of the substance. Unlike what the archons at CNN have told us and Mrs. Pelosi, this is certainly not the first time Americans have either stormed the Capitol
Oh,
um, or done more.
yeah. And that's
Um,
what's crazy too, is people have no idea of that somehow. And I'm like, this happens all the time.
yes. So, for instance, do you know why? Do you know the actual reason why DC is not part of the states?
Because they didn't want allegedly for the place of power to have that bias, right? That
Yes,
state would have bias over the federal
and
sort of,
yet
yeah.
during the early days of the Republic, that was the case in both Pennsylvania and New York at various times.
Fair.
And do you know why? Let's take that little microscope. Do you know why that became the conclusion? And maybe a sensible conclusion, maybe not.
No.
We don't have to work. We don't have to talk about whether it's sensible, and that's another discussion.
Yeah.
But there are historical precedents, and that's because the Continental Congress, which became the federal government, had promised all these men in Connecticut and New York and South Carolina, North Carolina, they'd promised them pensions for fighting in the war. And so they did. And after the war, the federal government now does what the federal government does very well to veterans, which is to treat them like garbage.
Yeah.
And they didn't pay the pensions.
Surprise.
And unlike what Mr. Cooper says, or Mr. Lemon, the Revolutionary War soldiers would routinely, when the Capitol was in Philadelphia, they would routinely march into the Continental Congress and arrest everyone.
That's awesome.
And the militia would not do anything because a lot of those guys were veterans too. So it got so ridiculous after a while. All these attorneys that became the federal government, they just had to leave and create their own little country called Washington, D.C.
Wow.
And again, contrast that to January 6th, right? There was a mission. In the 18th century, there was a mission. The men knew what to do. They did a citizen's arrest. They haggled things out. The attorneys talked their way out of it for a few weeks, rinse and repeat a couple of times. But even as late as the 1930s, the bonus marchers from World War I, right? Again, the guys who've been promised pensions, promised the earth, the sun, and the moon for going off to World War I. Here we are 15, 20 years later, right? Nothing, pennies, handouts, whatever. And so again, look at the masculine organization, even 100 years ago or 80 years ago. Again, they go down there, they camp out there, they do their speeches, they're there for several months. Eventually, MacArthur, to his great shame, comes and drives them out. I think that was Hoover's orders, but in any case, contrast that again to January 6th. Even contrast the Vietnam War protests, which were organized and had a mission, and they would surround the Pentagon and they would surround the White House, etc. And the mission can again contrast that. And by the way, and this is the last point, go and listen to the speeches of the men from the 18th century who arrested the Continental Congress for all their BS. Go listen to the bonus marchers, and a lot of that stuff's recorded. Listen to Mario Savio from the Vietnam War days, Rage Against the Machine, and that's where that line comes from. That guy was a janitor, and he was able to jump on a box and just speechify, and that's the level of rationality. Contrast that to the 6th of January, a bunch of guys just cussing up and down, being emotional, and then fizzling out not a day into it.
And it was almost like this confusion, like dementia almost thing, where people were like, what do we do now? What about this? Oh, that thing's shiny. Look over there. Let's go here. And then just like, I don't know. And even when they walked in, when they were allowed and invited to walk in, they stayed within the little velvet ropes, and they just like looked at things like they were on this museum walk. And And you can even contrast that too, right? When people are like, "Oh, well, they were going to take over and they were doing this, and I had trauma because they were miles away from me, and so I should have therapy now," or whatever AOC is saying. That.
The grandstanding of it all.
Yeah, and I'm like, and compare that to people who actually had, I don't know, any kind of plan or any kind of commitment or any kind of actual thoughts about anything. And this was the thing too that we talked about a couple times too, is if there's, look at the actual militias that we know exist in this country, right, that are waiting. Like, they are well armed, they train all the time, they're like the military. And in many aspects, those people didn't even show up, right? If those people had shown up and something had, then I'd say, okay, this was an actual attempt at something to happen, right? But they would have come in with a plan and with action and with organization and all of this, and they weren't even there. All the people who were there for a day protest to show what they, to vote with their presence, I guess, in some sort of way, or to just be, a lot of people there were just blatantly emotional idiots who had nothing except their rage to spew out or whatever. But yeah, I like that description of it, the over feminization and the toxic feminization, which is really sad, right? Like you said, if this janitor can get up and give this speech, and now we're at this point where even the educated, I think, could not most of the time.
Yeah, those guys, they would all flatter themselves because they could see within the matrix and they knew all the agendas, and they can't get a word out of their mouth without cussing and without, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I'm saying these guys cannot express their ideas.
Right.
They can just rage. And that's the point I'm trying to say.
Yeah, there was not, and if there was much of anything else going on that was more organized, intelligent, or directed, we definitely didn't see it in all of the various different angles of video that you can get and all of the various different levels of people you can talk to who were there. So I don't know, I'd love to be corrected, but I think you're right. Yeah,
wouldn't it have been crazy just to camp around and for the men to show up to camp there? You don't even have to bring guns. You were just going to stay here until something happened. I understand it's January. Okay, fine, I get it. But it would not have been beyond organizational possibility to keep men there encamped around the place. You don't even have to be a tight quartering because they got tunnels under there anyway. But
yeah.
But no, it was none of that. It was none of that at all. And of course, this is part of the reality. We can talk about this if you want, but Mr. Trump himself, at no point, in my estimation, at no point in the Steele did he really put up a fight.
No.
And I don't know what your thoughts on the matter were. I kind of saw him as a rather obnoxious, but type of Mr. Smith goes to Washington guy. I think he probably got into the election as a joke. Probably an ego thing. And then at a certain point, he realized there were all these salt of the earth people that supported him. And then I think he kind of got the faith, so to speak. And he seemed, after 2016, just to keep trying to just replay 2016. And what's weird about that is from various things I've heard, that the same sort of steal was attempted in 2016.
It seems so. I mean, when you break it down a bit in this article again, but I remember, having been already a pretty astute payer attention of all these things that goes on, and I was sure. I was like, the people in power, the archons, the rulers of the plane, they have selected Hillary. It's very obvious she's going to be our next president. There is no other option because they always get what they want. They've selected every president ever. And then when Trump won, I was like, oh, whoa, like upset. Like, this isn't even possible. So that was, as much as, like you said, he's sort of this buffoon, and I'm like definitely not aligned with him. But I also, at some level, was like, if that's real, if it's not an illusion and that wasn't part of the game, and he really did just take it because they're so full of hubris and, that they just like thought they would get it and didn't try all that hard and then didn't and were shocked, and that's why they hated him so much. I mean, it's a very well played game if it is a game, and it's possible, but and I kind of lean towards that a lot of times, that it is all orchestrated even at that level and that he's part of the game. But if not, then that gave me all this hope. I was like, well, he's not perfect, but if he like broke through that system and he's there, like, who knows what could happen next? And this is very exciting. But as time went on, I was like, he's not really doing anything revolutionary. He's not really pushing back. It's a fun show to watch, but what is of substance?
Yes, I mean, I've had similar thoughts myself. I mean, in my estimation, like you say, he did seem to break through the swamp or whatever, the cathedral. I like that expression. Um, and that was legitimate because that's the only thing for me that explains the behavior specifically of the institutional, not the, in my opinion, the legitimate left, of which there are many capable people, but the institutional left, CNN, etc., the DNC, who are hardly leftist in the proper sense, but that's another discussion. Um, but the I mean, they hated that man. What I observed for those 4 years, I mean, they hate him. There were witchcraft ceremonies going on in New York City when he would show up. Do you remember this? 2020, before all this COVID stuff. Remember at the end of the State of the Union, Nancy Pelosi tore up his speech on the camera, and that really weird back and forth with Kayleigh McEnany, who was probably the most shining star of everything that happened this autumn. She's
Kind
the
of
only
love her.
yeah, she's the only one that showed loyalty and professionalism. But that weird back and forth about there were 30 journalists that asked her, can you say Trump is not racist? I mean, it was this weird David Lynch thing, and she would just keep saying the same thing, and she would just have endless quotes from the guy saying, I'm not a racist, I love so-called black people, yada yada yada. And they would just keep running the same thing. And can you confirm for us? I mean, that was so weird.
So
And
weird.
the only thing that can explain all of that genuine hatred, in my opinion, is that they really did think Hillary was going to win, and there was actually an upset.
Yeah. I don't know. I always go back and forth because it seemed so obvious to me that that's who they chose. And then she didn't. I was like, how could this be? I don't know. And everyone seems so surprised. And it does definitely make sense that, like you said, all of these people, and you described this in your article too, that it's not just Republicans. It wasn't just a Republican thing. It was people who were just sick of this show where they had been shown over and over again that they don't matter and that no one cares about them. You know, just all of the people in the United States who had realized they don't have a seat at the table and they don't have a voice in the game. And here was this guy who seemed to be upsetting the system, and it was like, well, maybe we have a chance finally. And like you described in your article too, there's like truckers and like these people who are like writing letters to him in hopes that he was actually going to listen because no one had for so long, and he might because he is different. And that's so interesting to think about. But if that's true, why did he fail so miserably? He could have done so many things.
He got in there, I believe, because he marshaled, as you pointed out from my essay, he marshaled this very large confederacy of people who had been shut out of the cathedral. And people who haven't seen our past episodes, when I say the cathedral, that's an expression from a scholar called Mencius Mollberg, where he speaks about the blob of power in the society. It's all those confederated interests, the colleges, the religion, the state structure, the economics. That's the cathedral.
Yeah, I like that.
And the cathedral is very good at taking elements of society and using it for its own ends. So this is an example before I get to my main point. For instance, the State Department has both backed the Islamists in Syria, and from all of their buildings, they're flying the homosexual flag right now. And of course, if a homosexual walked into Idlib in Syria, what do you think would happen?
Worse, yes, actually. There'd be torture involved, I'm sure.
Yes, and yet it's the same cathedral in America that's backing them. So the cathedral is this like the blob. Yeah. So when I say that is not so much Donald Trump, but rather the men around him initially in 2015 and 16 and 17, particularly Steve Bannon, he was able to perceive this, and then. It can only Allahu Alam, God knows, I don't know, but Donald Trump seems to be very bad at picking lieutenants. And after the initial flush, because it's typical for people to kind of sign on for like a year and then they're going to go on with their lives. After the first year, he just had bad decisions. As I say in the essay, believe a lot of that had to do with the advice he was getting from his son-in-law, Jared Kushner. And so that's after the initial flush. The initial people are they go their way, and they're replaced by epinomes. They're replaced by less qualified people, more careerists, more of the swamp sorts, and I think this was a personal weakness of Trump, is he couldn't hire decent people, and so he himself just kept trying to replay 2016. He never stopped campaigning. Um, seemed to make no provision at all for the same sorts of midnight voting steals that happened in 2016.
Mm-hmm.
And yet the agenda they provided for every way they failed in their coup, in particular in 2016. They
fixed all those holes.
yeah,
Yeah.
because they provided just for the elector the vote in November, right? They didn't cover any of their other bases. The election in December they didn't cover, nor the confirmation, nor a number of other things.
Back in
They spent
2016.
4 years. Let's
Yeah.
break it down.
Back in 2016, you're saying they didn't cover those other two crucial moments. They just
Yeah,
did the vote. Yeah.
they thought it was enough just to have the mainstream media, which
Hubris.
wasn't. Yeah, it wasn't quite as weaponized as it was in 2020, right? They thought that what it was in 2016, the mainstream media, and then the electoral votes, they thought that would be enough to punch through Hillary. I mean, Hillary Clinton was at the Costco 10 miles down the road here, down in Danbury, Connecticut. Nobody showed up. They were more interested in the snacks at Costco than to see that woman. And the same with, even more ridiculous, with Joe Biden, who sat in a basement for 9 months. And he's rolled out, and now I'm told by Mr. Cooper and Mr. Lemon, I'm told he's the most popular president in American history, and this is
so crazy.
David Lynch.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. If that's it, that could very well be true, you know. And I think about that too, is that if he was bad at selecting these people, maybe he wasn't that bad at selecting them, but maybe he underestimated how many of them were in the pockets or had this blackmail. You know, you talk about in your article too, the color coding of these people, like how much dirt do we have on them? Like them, not so much. Them, like a good amount. Them, like, oh, we got them. Like they're never going to be out from under our thumb. And maybe he thought there were people who were uncompromised and they just weren't. You know, and so maybe they were like sort of okay for a while, but then someone called in like, hey, you're going to do this or we're going to release this tape we have of you on Epstein Island.
Yes, I mean, there's that, or threats against his children, particularly the young son, Barron. I've thought about that. Listen, you and I, when we were coming up, the United States corporation went into Iraq and they killed 1 million Iraqis, and nobody blinked and nobody cares, and the world went on. And so that for me is the standard, that this system will do what it wants, and they'll kill a kid. They'll kill a president in daylight if they want. So I have run that aspect, or that possibility. Yeah, I mean, and at the end, I do not think he was an actor. I know some people really get into that, and they have their proofs, but I saw him as this Mr. Smith, but he never had anyone that followed his orders. I mean, there was outright countermanding.
Yeah.
What do you call it? Contradiction, countermanding is not the word, but yeah, insubordination. Yes, that's the word. I mean, there was outright insubordination from the generals and from his own cabinet by 2020.
God. Yeah, and that's the thing too. It's like, we all know all of the rhetoric about him, you know, is inflammatory and just flat out lies. Like, he's not a racist. He's not in any way trying to create a dictatorship, or, you know, like other presidents actually would say, like on like recorded, saying like, I wish I was a dictator, and he never did anything like that. Like, all of these things are absolute lies. But yeah, how can you ever, if the system were to ever have any integrity, how could you ever deny that the president or anyone in charge would need their people under them to be subordinate, right? Like, that's a requirement. And so even if you don't agree with this person 100%, you have to agree that it would be completely wrong to just absolutely, especially that often, and that left and right, just all over the place, to just go against that. It's very, I don't know, but people don't have this level of principle. You know, they have this like, oh, it's totally not, he's wrong, he's doing this, it's blah, 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 blah. And then their guy does, and they're like, yeah, but that's just, shh, it's fine. You're like, why can't you have principles? Why can't you see what is right and wrong and apply it fairly in every case, you know? I don't know. Nobody has that. Not nobody. Very rarely do people have anything like that.
Yes, and the weird thing is when very, very early in November, when it became obvious what had happened, the oddest thing is Donald Trump didn't even seem to really push back, to be honest. There was a very lame start to the to his defense, I suppose you could say, with Rudy Giuliani, where in the opening months they would hold news conferences, and the reporters say, "What proof do you have of this happening?" And Eric Trump and Rudy Giuliani would say, "Well, we don't have, just wait for it." Giving every allowance to what happened. You can't. I mean, that's sloppy.
Yeah.
That's You can't call a press conference and say just wait for the
Just
truth.
wait for it.
And then the Gettysburg Conference right before Thanksgiving, the day before Thanksgiving, to have all these affidavits and everything out there. And then by November and December, you also start having rallies. There were two major rallies before the 6th of January, and Donald Trump didn't even attend the first two.
Yeah, I don't understand that either.
I mean, if that were you or I imagine we would, if nobody, if let the heavens fall, if nobody was there, we would be on the steps of the White House with a bullhorn, or do we go down if people showed up to slap him on the back?
Mm-hmm.
But he didn't even acknowledge them.
That's strange. Even if there was like a credible assassination threat or something, I would think there would be anywhere, and I would think that they'd have, methods in place to try and protect. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say what someone should do in that instance. But you could easily enough, Allahu Alam, it would be easy enough to provide for your family, send them away. And then you're a man, so you should, you're going to play, you're going to have all these Rambo, a 7-year-old man with Rambo's body. You're going to play into that. Fine, well, be the Rambo.
Yeah.
But again, this is speculation. What isn't speculation, as I saw it, is that he really didn't himself really push back. There was the initial anemia, then the defense team split, and he went initially with the rump of with Giuliani and the going into the voter machines. The schism was obviously Sidney Powell and Lynn Wood, who were getting into kind of deep state stuff and stuff overseas and the China and the Dominion voting. It wasn't until that meeting in I think the 23rd of December where Sidney Powell and Mike Lindell, the Pillow Band, were invited in, and then there was the big cussing match, and you had people walking off, turning in their resignation then and there, and then Trump kind of went in for kind of what I thought was the meteor of the accusations. And then everything else, as I say, was postscript after that. And even on the 6th of January, he didn't go to the Capitol, which is, in my opinion, the only, as I say, sin that he did. He didn't back he should have been there with some boxing gloves. I mean, if you're gonna, that's whatever. It was. Well, to get back to our initial point, and I'll put a sock in it. It's almost, we talk about the aesthetic or the form of it, but even the man himself at the end, there was no substance.
Yeah, and that's what really, I guess, in my mind kind of pushed me closer to it must have been a part of the game all along, because I can't imagine, like you said, being in that place and not having the moral conviction and the principles to say, like, okay, well, I might get shot or whatever, but this is our entire nation at risk. And like you have said very astutely in this essay, that there's no going back from here. Like, it's over now. It's kind of done. That was kind of like the last hope and the last stand. And so why wouldn't you sacrifice anything you needed to and give anything you needed to in order to keep that? But again, that makes me think, like, well, then that's part of the game, right? Because maybe we're meant to feel that there was no going back, and that was the last hope, and that it was given up. Do you know what I mean?
Yes. How much is it? Spy versus spy versus spy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Or making a parallel to the UFO stuff now. It's gotten popularized. It's all weapons programs, and then people are kind of no, that's just a story to cover the story to cover the story, and it's
you could go endlessly down this loop.
Yeah, it's gonna get so crazy. I don't even think this is a silver lining at this point, but I've seen things just in the past couple of weeks where it's getting so bonkers, and it's such a Patipkin village that even the mainstream media, even some of them are bucking up against this facade. Do you know what I mean when I say Patipkin village?
No.
This was a village in the early Soviet Union, and this was after the Civil War, and there was a lot of hardship actually, and a lot of reprisals and death, and the beginning of the gulags. But the Soviets would have, I guess it'd be late 20s, so Stalin was in there. The Soviets would have these villages, of which the most famous was this Patipkin village, where all the Western reporters would come with these big wide eyes about this new world that was being created. But it was all staged. It was all it was just for the news media. So I'm make that historical parallel to now, where you have a man with dementia who is being toddled out. And we get into the tragedy of this man's situation, but and then you have generals behind him, including the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, which looks literally like an army man soldier from like Toy Story or something. If you can look up Mark Milley, you might want to put it up on the screen there. He's literally out of like a bag of green army soldiers. And you have Jill Biden kind of leading this man around, and there's a fence around the Capitol. There's a fence around the People's House, which is one of the old names for the White House. And it's through. There's no going back. It's all just theater now. It's all just democracy theater now.
That's so funny. He does look like that. He's like the traditional army man. And it is, you're right. And this is the thing that has been one of the many clown show moments for me, where I'm like, is this really happening? Is that fence around the Capitol, and that it's still there,
Mm-hmm.
and that they're like, oh yeah, it's probably going to need to be here at least until September, and you're like, why September? Do you have a reason for that? And they're like, shh, and then they just walk away, and you're like, wait, what's happening? Like, why does nobody care that this is happening, and that they're not even giving us a reason anymore? They just don't have to, and that's never going to matter. It's crazy.
Yes, and I marvel too in the response to the 6th of January, Lindsay. The agendas were just ready to roll. So of course there was the tech agenda, people being rounded up based on their cell phone data. And by the way, I should say this, for whatever even sentimental fondness or benefit of the doubt I'll give Donald Trump, he has not been to one arraignment. He has not said a word about the men who are in the dungeons of the United States right now, the political prisoners who went out to his support.
How many people are locked up right now without any release? It's in the thousands, right?
Yes. Yeah. I can't say that. I don't know. I don't gainsay it either. I don't know the number, but it's many men. And again, not a word from Donald Trump. So I understand what you're saying. It's the horns of a dilemma. Was he legitimate? Was he not? Did he start legitimate and then he lost heart? So that's, I guess, one thing that we can hash out in the years ahead.
Yeah, we'll see.
But it's the other agenda besides the tech stuff. And now again, this is kind of beta testing, not just the cell phone tracking, but now the social credit score, which is not coming from the state like in Asia, but it's coming from the corporations. There is already a social credit score in this country for employers. They'll hire these capitalists. They have these businesses. They'll sell anything, these people, and they have these businesses, and they've already been crunching this stuff now. This isn't coming from China. It's already here in a different fashion. But again, that's rolled out. People have had their bank accounts pulled. They've had their funds frozen and so forth. And then you also have to conclude with this idea of, the agenda being supercharged. You have the alt world, the conspiracy world, the right, or whatnot, which wasn't always the same thing. But over the past 5 years, the conspiracy world kind of went into the whole Trump train, conservative right thing. I think back, we're on the 10-year anniversary of Occupy. I mean, all those guys were all, 9/11 truth. And I marvel to see how things have been shifted.
Mm-hmm.
And now, in the wake of the 6th of January, it's fascinating, Lindsay, to see it. You have this shifting of the Overton window. Do you understand that?
Yeah, and I think most people listening will, but that's the idea that it's sort of like this is the window of what's acceptable, and you're gonna like push it over to this extreme so that the whole window shifts to that. So now what used to be extreme is like pretty normal, and then you can keep moving it.
Exactly. And what I've noticed, because I do, as I mentioned, I have a certain affinity for what can broadly be called the conservative movement. So I keep up with certain things. And what you're seeing now within that wide world is the institutional conservative movement, much like the institutional liberal movement, has shifted into the cathedral. And a lot of the actual principled conservatives, whether that's your pro-life or your family values or your religious sorts, they are being shown the door by the GOP. So even the GOP is morphing into this other thing.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. And every time, the agenda more and more isolates those it wishes to. Which aren't just principled conservatives, but that is definitely anyone with principles. That I think, as you said, anyone with any sort of principle, that's the enemy. And this happens to be the main course right now. That's the main course of the principled conservatives. Soon it'll be whatever the New Age people. They'll be cornered out, and this is how the cathedral operates.
That's a really good point, that it's principles and conviction in general. Because the whole reason why, if you look and you're one of the people who see this sort of attack on the family that's been happening, just the family unit for however long, that's also the same sort of impetus that creates that, right? Is like, well, we need to destroy anything that people would consider to be worth dying for, worth fighting for, worth like giving up their life for, right? Because we need them to be just nice and controllable in this little box. And so we need to start to disrupt and destroy that. That's one of the many things. But anybody with principles and convictions is a good way to put it, too. Because it is weird. It is weird to suddenly have, I started and wherever, like the 90s and the early 2000s, and I was like a radical leftist, and we're like anti-war, and then Occupy came, and that was very leftist, yes. Right? Left leaning. I don't know if leftist is the right word, whatever, but like left leaning.
Legitimately leftist. It was real left.
Real, right. And that was all of the sort of conspiracy that I came up with was all very left wing. Mm-hmm. And then to see this, like you were saying, this like right wing, and now that's fully what all conspiracies now are right wing. Officially, they are all right wing. So if you go into anywhere and you're like talking about even JFK assassination, like the Lily White conspiracies, and you talk about that, people are like, oh, that's QAnon. Like, do you realize that this conspiracy, that the thing happened way before QAnon? The conspiracy theory has been around for decades before QAnon. How is it QAnon? But people are controlled enough in their minds that it's all QAnon now, it's all right wing. And what's the biggest enemy right now? They say, what is our biggest terrorist threat right now? What's the narrative saying?
White extremists,
white conservative extremists, white supremacists, which what they mean is anybody who is a traditional conservative or Republican. So it's this very open war on that whole world. And it's so weird for me to have been like thrust into the mix with very conservative people, and then to realize that we don't actually have much that's not in common, and then to realize that maybe I've been conservative all along, but the lines are always blurry and the agenda is always like really active, even in those of us who are thinking people, but to see that and then to see this is very, very interesting. Really, it's just anyone who is thinking person with any level of critical analysis who has any conviction or principles.
Yeah, I mean, and those differences are not as far apart as one might think. To go back to our initial talk on education, the homeschool movement, whatever its problems and whatever its incompetences, the homeschool movement is the product of the hard left, the legitimate left, and the hard right, particularly the religious right from the 1960s and 70s. That is your homeschool movement, and it's kind of sorted out, but it comes from why? Because both those peoples have principles, and they have ideas, and they have brains that they're operating on, and they have at least enough integrity to operate and act on those principles.
That's a really good point. And then we always get back to this, right, where we have more in common than we ever have apart. It's interesting too. I just want to touch on this because you talk about the sort of programming around the idea of civil war and how nobody was thinking about a civil war, and then the Atlantic, or had how to stop a civil war, and we had all these movies too, and they were literally called like Civil War. Many movies called
The
Civil
Purge,
War,
right?
yeah, and all this programming, and I saw the same thing, and I was like, shit, we're going into. They're gonna make it happen. People are gonna fall for it and gonna do it, and we haven't really. Do you think that that's still coming, still being programmed for? Do you think the use is past, or what? What do you think about that?
I definitely think in retrospect, all of that was psyop. I think that was all psyop. Uh, and again, we took the bait. Our whatever, the people who get into conspiracy stuff, they love, oh my goodness, America's on the verge of civil war.
Yeah, true.
Their eyes get big. And we took that hook, line, and sinker, and we took that twice on Sunday and once a day in between from about August until January. So, again, let's learn from our own mistakes and the gullibility that we went in for.
Yeah.
I do not believe Americans are on the verge of civil war. They're the people, as we saw on the 6th of January, they're so incompetent they couldn't even pull off a decent masculine protest. Are you kidding me? That you're going to be able to have enough discipline for military action?
War, yeah.
The men here all have beer bellies. They're drunk half the time. They can't get to where they need to be on time. I know a lot of these people in my own life. They don't have the personal discipline, and they're going to have fantasies about having enough discipline to work on military stuff. Come on. I mean, look at the Iraqis and the Libyans, and these are men and societies that were far, far healthier in terms of being able to operate physical force.
True.
And to their credit, they've at least kept that up, their own errors aside. Are you kidding me that the American manhood would ever be able to have that sort of competence at this hour?
Not with a mystery miracle meat that we're all supposed to start eating now. I keep seeing it in stores now, and I'm like, it looks disgusting. And I'm like, God, we're going to be drinking. They are literally calling it Soylent. I'm like, why are you doing this to us? And then the mystery meat stuff. But, and the bugs. We can't forget the bugs. We're going to be eating bugs, too. That's the dream of Klaus Schwab. And Soros. But you've also bring up, and this is interesting too, given what we were just talking about, is, can the people even organize and all of this, or do people think that? Do the people think this? Well, it's really hard to even know what the people think, because we have these armies and armies of social media, just creators and actors that just like put fake ass shit everywhere, and bots. Put the two together, and it's like, I don't know what's real anymore.
Yes, that's the rub there. So our physical, spiritual, interpersonal health declines, our economic health declines, even if we flatter ourselves seeing through the matrix, and the agenda just keeps running this, and it gets crazier. Remember that like 2 months ago, Lindsay, they got tired of so-called Black oppression, so they turned to Asian oppression.
Yeah.
And like every poor Chinese guy was being lynched on a tree, and if it wasn't one China man on a tree, there'd be some so-called Black guy on the next tree, and a China. I mean, if you watched it, you would think this is like Uganda or one of those what was the Hutsi and the Tutsi. You would think that there were pogroms going on everywhere to watch the TV, and everyone gets along fine.
Yeah.
But the perception is different, and I mean, they run this. Remember, like 3 years ago, they always have to have an enemy. They always have to pull. Remember the virgins, right? It was supposed to be. Remember 3 years ago, it was all involuntary celibate people.
Oh, the incels, yeah.
Remember this? And then they ran like the Muslims. And then back in the 90s, they used to run the white militia. And they just it's more bizarre. It's more bizarre each one. And then they sometimes get lazy and they recycle it, and it just gets crazier and crazier.
And people buy it more and more. Even this with the COVID thing, and people were like, oh, well, Asians are getting like so much hate and whatever, and I'm like, okay, maybe, where, like, who, when, like, what can you show me to try and convince me that this is happening? and somebody was like, oh my God, how could you not believe it's happening? There was a little girl in my town. She was a little 3-year-old girl, and people were spitting on her because she was an Asian. And I was like, first of all, I don't believe you. And second of all, if anybody spit on a child, I would beat the shit out of them with anything I had with me. Like, my violence would just emerge, and that person would be a bloody pulp. And I expect other adults would be similar to some degree. So I especially don't believe that happened. But also, if anybody spit on this little child, they were going to spit on that little child no matter what disease was anywhere in the world or going on, because that person's sick. Like, that's all that's going on. It's not about racism. It's that person or maybe it is racism, but it has nothing to do with anything else except that person is a sick person. So what is this? Your logic doesn't even hold up within your story.
Yes, it's really interesting, and maybe if we can spend a minute on this, Lindsay, I think you'd be a good one to talk about this, because I don't hear enough people bring this aspect of things up, is the sorrow of the fact that good things are being turned against us. So you have COVID-19, or you have the reaction to it, and what motivates that but compassion? I mean, that's being turned by the archons upon us, but it's human compassion. That's what's causing stink eye when I'm not wearing my mask or walking in the right direction or whatever. There's actually a type of weaponized compassion there.
True.
Or you have the homosexual movement and whatever benefit they've brought for themselves, and yet they've clearly been taken into the Borg. And I think the conspiracy people were right on the edge of that. So we're going to be in this. It must be a living hell to be a homosexual activist, and to have the consciousness of what I just said about the State Department, or the way the corporations have used what the individual activists, are trying to do, or the so-called Black people who have certain concerns and so forth. But clearly, it's being gobbled up, as I watched on CNN last night. People who were aggressed in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and they are being cynically used. It's almost like a cannon, like a cannon's captured at Gettysburg and it's like turned around on people. Do you get that? I mean, that's the type of melancholy I'm sensing. And again, it's not a personal melancholy necessarily, but there's a certain cloud or whatever, that there's such goodness and such truth to what's being presented, but it's all being hollowed out and weaponized.
Yeah. And that's the thing too, when people are saying like, this is racist, that's racist, this is racist, you're racist. I'm like, okay, if you keep this up, nothing is now racist, because it doesn't matter anymore, because everything is racist. So what will happen when someone actually has, like, they're turned away from something because they're Black, or they're like lynched, or like whatever because of their skin color or anything else? Now we have very little emotion or reaction to it, because you've stolen it all to give it to this shit that isn't actually at all racist in any way. Or if it is, it's like slightly bigoted, and maybe, like, I don't know, like it's just a different sort of thing. And I'm just saying that there's gonna be people who are like, she's just white privilege, and I'm like, I fucking hate you all, because you can't think and you can't speak and you can't actually deal with what's going on enough to get to the bottom of it. And I have a friend who his father, they're Black, and he was actually a part of the civil rights movement. And he, even before this is like this is like 15 years ago or something, was like, I don't understand why these people are pretending like shit is still bad. Like, it was bad then, and there was actually like violence, and there's actual fear, and you actually had to worry for your life and your safety and your livelihood. And now, like, if some guy is just like racist, like, I don't care if he's gonna call me like names, like the N-word or whatever, that's his problem. No one's trying to actively destroy my life anymore, especially not as a society or like a culture. And so it's fine. Like, it's good now. Like, people need to calm down. And I'm like, if that person's saying that, I think there's a lot of people who would be saying that. And I think we've lost this sort of context at all. When you take all these people who are fully immersed in the digital age, and they have no context, and they have no adults who experience that context either, who are there to correct it for them, and they're just being fed this line like, this is awful, all Black people are hated, they're all targeted, all gay people are hated and targeted. And you're like, well, there is stuff going on, we can address it, but we can't do it if you're gonna just lie about it and like, pretend like everything is that. It's crazy. Yeah. And wouldn't you feel used and abused if you were aware enough to see that?
Yeah, I mean, on the local level, the only people in this country that I've ever met who were racist are guys who saw what was happening. They could see the BS from the mainstream, and they would deliberately say certain ethnic words. And it was not out of animosity because the delivery man would come by, or this guy or whatever. It wasn't out of animosity, but people, it was just to shove back against, is in, at least in personal conversation, which is probably all they could do. Um, that's it. That's it. And it's like research into, were there exaggerations of crimes committed against certain ethnic minorities in the Second World War? Were there certain exaggerations for political reasons after? Okay, and some people know what I'm talking about. Maybe. Was Newtown's about 15 miles away? Was there a lot of funny business? Yeah, maybe. Yeah, kind of. Yeah, yeah. Was there a lot of funny business about the Twin Towers? Yeah. And the weaponization is so great that, I mean, to honor whoever was violated in those things, that's why you get to the bottom of it. And yet the weaponization is so great that even to question it is, you're disrespecting everyone, you're dishonoring everyone. And or to point out the progress made on the ethnic issue in this country, again, it's so fine-tuned at this hour.
It's ridiculous. I've lived abroad in other countries, and I've seen what actual really, really awful racism is like, and what actual homophobia and transphobia is like,
Mm-hmm.
where people's lives are actually at stake all day, every day, because of the color of their skin or their religion or who they like to experience sexual activity with or whatever. That
Yeah, you've been
real.
to Turkey, right? You've been to Turkey?
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
it's
How do the
not.
Turks like the Greeks? How do they like the Greeks?
Yeah, yeah. And how do I've lived in Bahrain too, and I can't remember which group's on top and which is on bottom, but there's the Shiites and the Sunnis, and like that is not. That's why I left that country, because I couldn't live near it anymore, because people were dying. People I knew were getting tortured. I'm not exaggerating. There was bombs going off and people were dying. Like that's racism. That's like oppression. And this is not it. And that's not to say that there's not things that we can't correct and do better at. But like you said, we're not even acknowledging the progress we've made. Last year was the least amount of people of color being killed by police, especially when they are armed or unarmed, both. And yet we still had these like riots about it. And I'm like, that's just insanity. That's not thoughtful. It's not rational. It's not helping anyone. And it's based on a lie. So yes, I'll never say racism doesn't exist, but to pretend like it's still as big of a problem as we're pretending like it is insane to me. And I know that any intelligent person knows that I'm saying, yes, racism exists. And no, it's not as big of a problem as we're pretending like it is right now.
Yeah, I mean, 2 months ago, you want real racism. 2 months ago, the Ethiopian army crossed into Eritrea. We don't know where those countries are, but because we're on Twitter all day,
Yeah.
but those are two countries. And the Ethiopians went into one of these villages and chopped off the arms and the legs of all these beautiful girls after they raped them. That's real racism. And that happened 2 and 3 months ago, and that's still going on.
Fuck.
And in Syria and so forth. And it is, I always suggest this to people, go watch France 24, go watch Al Jazeera, go watch RT, watch anything that is an American media, and you're looking at a different world.
Different world. Yeah. And even the gay thing too in Turkey is, and most Muslim countries, is also like, you'll die. There's, the only way you can get out of serving in the Turkish military is to prove that you're gay. I've heard that you literally have to have photographic evidence of things inserted inside of you in specific ways in order to prove that you're gay. And even then, people still won't do it, because if they then prove that they're gay and they're openly gay, they might get killed.
Yeah.
And there's a few places like in Istanbul, you might be able to get away with it. But no, not the rest of the country, not most of the time. But yeah, people don't have that perspective, and like you were saying about the countries going into other countries and just massacring. And I really liked this book by Dave Eggers. It was called "What Is the What?" because before I read this book, I had no perspective on in Africa the Muslim expansion and coming into tribal areas and just massacring everyone and having just nothing. There's no rape all the women, kill everybody, and take the slaves, take children, and take women as slaves. And then to see the trying to escape from that, and these people want to come to America, obviously, because we have no slave trade here openly, at least, and we have protections for all these things, and it's a great country. It's the least racist, most open, most religiously diverse, most accepting nation in the history of the world, as far as I know, and we're burning our cities down because we think it's racist. It's insane. But like you said, it's weaponized. It's intentional, and it's very, very effective.
I hope that as we get our bearings going forward, that we appreciate and come to, again, getting back to principles and everything, we really try to figure out what we love about America. Yeah. What is American culture? I know in the alt world or the conspiracy world, because things like patriotism and, as we mentioned, public school, and these things have been used and abused, people, again, they're very trigger happy with things, and they throw out. I mean, I'm getting this a lot in my ed stuff. I'm getting that whole sentiment of, hey, we don't need no education. All schools are brainwashing camps. All public schools are government indoctrinate. I'm getting that all the time now. 20 years ago, you heard it in certain areas, but I think we need to realize how far down the dialogue route that we've gone. It's almost like, the Hatfields and McCoys.
Yeah.
Right. You live in Bahrain. There's a similar story about the time of Muhammad, where there were two families that were fighting. And
that's the same thing that's going on today. It's still same thing. Yeah.
And these fights go on so long that people forget the origins. And that even in the alt world, we've so reacted against the abuse of patriotism and religion and school, yada, yada, yada. Maybe we should try to go, discover what is good in those things. What is America? What is the narrative and so forth? It doesn't have to be the old one, but right now we have nothing.
Yeah. It's a very good call to action, and it's a very good request for inner reflection, because I think people have long since, like you said, abandoned some of these things because they were corrupted or weaponized or used against them, and therefore lost what was good in them, like you said. And there's, I always go back to this book that I had this beautiful professor who had me read, Bowling Alone.
And yes, I had a very similar experience in college with, professor as well.
Yeah. Such a good book. And one of her assignments that she would give us is like, okay, go to 3 different political meetings of 3 different, especially ones that you've never heard of or don't know anything about. And okay, now go to 3 different churches, especially ones you've never heard of or that are not your own. And, do all these things to try and show us that, like, A, people are more similar than they are different. And B, there's a level of camaraderie and community there that most of us had been lacking in our entire lives at that age that we were at, because of this phenomenon that Bowling Alone exposes, of just lower and lower and lower and lower participation rates, not just in churches, but in bowling leagues and in like cook-offs and in like I don't know, anything you can name. We used to do stuff together. And even, like you said, if we didn't have this common core of like, this is our education, or this is our patriotism, or this is our, religion, I think I already said that, but whatever. At least we had this idea of like, well, this is my community. These are the people who I associate, and this is what my town is like, and here's what my whatever it is. We don't have anything like that. We don't have anything, especially those of us who have rejected education and rejected our country and rejected religion altogether. We've got nothing. We've got this. I mean, that's personally like why I started Rogue Ways, is because I'm like, people need community. Like, let's have some kind of a group so we can connect with each other, because we're desperate for it. We don't have it anywhere.
Yeah, and we are addicted to this Lone Ranger programming. I have seen from the 6th of January, there are shot-for-shot scenes on the steps of the Capitol, which come out of the Mel Gibson movie, The Patriot. I assume that's a well enough film that I can make a reference to the closing part, where the main character has been wounded, and then he sees a flag. He sees Betsy Ross flag, and he gets a second wind, and he sees the counter charge, and that that exact thing happened. Come on, guys, they run up the steps, and it's the same stuff. And what I'm saying is not that that was staged in the way Newtown was staged, but rather that people's minds are so into this Lone Ranger Rambo type of thing that that they'll never be able to do anything as long as we stay as these little individual atoms in our chat rooms and so forth, and we don't go out there, and we just keep having these little sectarian divisions, even in the truth world, as I intimated in my own experience. The agendas is Borg. They don't play around like that. They don't make those mistakes. They have their own culture, shall we say. But we're just so addicted to this fantasy that we're going to be Mel Gibson in the woods fighting off the people. We're going to be Rambo in the cave. We're going to be Neo in the Matrix, and we're going to grab the gun on the table, Lindsay, and we're going to shoot our way out of there. and we love it. We can't get enough of that. We love talking about the Civil War, and we have fantasies of ourselves with six packs running around, fighting around, even though we have a beer belly and we're drunk half the time. But this is where we're at. It's all in the mind. And the 6th of January was the proof of that.
Yeah. There was no cohesion at all. And there really can't be if people aren't willing to connect and have community with people who aren't 100% exactly like them. Like, I had this very dear friend. I thought we understood that I accept all and every religion and tradition and background, and I have no problem with people who are in any given church or whatever. I don't care. I think it's a beautiful thing to have that. And to believe and to have a community, and I sometimes go on the defense of some of these religions and organizations, because I understand that, like, yes, history is full of mistakes, and at the same time, most people, I should say, who are upholding these religions today have no stake in that and have no agreement with that. They just enjoy community, and they just enjoy having a faith in something that they can believe in, right? And just got attacked by this person and then just abandoned, never talked to again, just because I defended that this is an appropriate choice for people and that it's okay and that we shouldn't, like, hate on them for it. And that's that type of thing you're talking about, where it's like, well, you're not exactly 100% doing what I think, and so I can't even talk to you ever again. I'm like, this is insanity. Like, this is insanity, especially because we had 98% agreement in every other thing, but that one little thing was like. And I get that there could be that, right? If you're a child rapist, that's the one thing that, well, now I never will talk to you again, and I will hopefully get you in prison or dead. But this is not one of those things, Like, these things that people are so quick, like you said, to just, like, react to and then drop you or just leave and, like, oh, your school's not for me because it's not 100% every way exactly like my imagined, like, ideal fantasy. It's just crazy. It's crazy. We have to have a little bit more sense than that, I think.
Yes, I'm my next essay, I always put these things off. They take forever to write. My next one is looking at the future of institutional Christianity, and part of that has to be what that was originally, which is very different from what it is now. Even the groups that imagine great conformity with the past, and part of it, I think, it's a very pre-modern. You see the same thing in Islam. You see the same thing in various other pre-modern systems. It was way more plastic and way more able to engraft large swaths of different personalities. And what you're seeing now is it's really, I'm not just talking about Christianity, but we, as in modernity, all we have the ability to do, because we've been so specified and identified and quantified, and we've been put in, as we spoke in the education talk, and in the nudist talk, we've been so put into these boxes that the only solution we have is to go deeper into them. And that's why you have the New Age movement, which cannot speak to, in its own cannot speak to the more formalistic religions of Islam or Christianity. Whereas 1,000 years ago, you didn't have that, because the mindset was different, and not just in a way spiritual.
That's really fascinating to think about. We become more and more rigid, and as we become more and more individualistic and separate from one another, we become more and more rigid. Kind of makes sense.
And more and more miserable.
It's all connected. It's all interconnected. It's all the same sort of sickness at the core, which is manipulated by the rulers. But where do we go from here? What do you feel like is the hope for the future, given the agenda and given how effective it's been, and given that there's no going back from this point, and that everything is just sort of openly controlled without apology?
Where are things going? I think it will continue to get more bizarre. I mean, you're having the governor of Virginia speak with a straight face and a nice southern drawl about post-birth abortion, and nobody's blinking an eye.
God, I can't even
Uh,
imagine.
and I mean, and this is all speculation, of course. I mean, do things get so bonkers that even the agenda, the people on the agenda, are like, this is crazy? Maybe. I mean, I've seen a few interesting things, at least from individual news correspondents and things, even in the big MSNBC and whatever, where they actually asked certain questions. Is that a flash in the pan? We'll find out. I mean, I guess that's the best case scenario. Is this gets so hellish and so tyrannical that even those servants of the machine wake up.
That'd be cool.
That would be
hope.
Cool. Is that practical? Is that realistic? Probably not. Where do we go? I guess back to principles. I mean, most of the stuff I do, the past couple of months is just getting back to interpersonal behavior, manners. I have this old Reader's Digest book. We're just going through American history little by little. But I think it's to get to those principles, which doesn't mean resurrecting whatever was necessarily, but realizing that maybe even those of us that have seen through certain things, maybe we've thrown out certain babies with certain bath waters. And that's it. And then to work, yes, as I've said a couple of times now in our time together over these episodes, Lindsay, yes, to be ready, to be physically ready, economically ready to rock and roll if needs be. And it doesn't have to be physical, but it might be. But where things go, I think the most realistic is to prepare another generation to do better than we have. And so for myself, everything is post-mortem at this point, is getting ready for the next generation. That's for me, that's going to be education.
Yeah, that's actually part of why I went into education too, is hope that I could instill what I could in the future. But I have that respect for people who have children and are raising children in this way that helps them, see through things while also creating what they can and taking responsibility for themselves enough to at least be that aspect of our society that's not crumbling, which is really nice. And I guess, wow, we've really filled up a couple hours here, so it's probably a good time to take things to a conclusion anyway. And I like that hope for the future. What do you think will be the main obstacle aside from, the agenda? Like, what's our personal failure that might get in the way?
Lack of discipline in our own lives, lack of maybe confronting things that need to be. That's going to be different for everyone. That's going to be also very difficult, again, because of the media, because we're being presented with rockin' bods and no one has any emotional problems. And the problems that already exist are weaponized upon us. So we all tune out of them, like we've mentioned.
And nothing's our fault.
Yeah. But yeah, I suppose we are our greatest in hindrance, because once, or should we get our own personal house in order and our families, the alternative movement of various factions and so forth, indeed is too factionalized. I really suggest people, maybe it's the humanist teacher in me, but I really would suggest people go back to explore things before the Enlightenment. Explore the ways people looked at the world before the Enlightenment, because left, right, center, man, woman, yada yada yada, we are all in our little factions, your left, right, yada yada, we are all children of the Enlightenment, and it seems to be the same errors that are repeating, whether it's just drilling down in our own little sects and rabbit holes and never being able to make any larger point. I would just ask or suggest that people look at pre-modern poetry when they're done with your poetry and history and so forth, and realize that there are other ways of looking at the world that go back before 200 years ago.
I love that. Get some perspective in that way, and that is in itself its own form of discipline. And self responsibility, right? And it's funny too. I think a lot of these things we've talked about do become very personal like that, and very internal, and that's why I always like to say to look inside first, because you know those little bits that you can chip away at and create this new awareness in yourself, different perspective in yourself, and create something in your life, whether it's like through what you do, like education and teaching or writing or sharing podcasts or whatever it is, you might actually be creating and producing out there in the world, that can trickle down. But also just your presence and your way of being and the things you talk about and the way that you talk about them and the way that you connect with other people, that has this rippling effect too that goes out who knows how far, forever, into infinity. So it's like the whole problem is overwhelming, and you know we have a lot of grimness about the future, but you always can bring it back to that point, and that makes it a lot more manageable and a lot more immediate and empowering too.
Yes, and once we have that, if I could build off of that, I would say also have that consciousness of working into community beyond oneself, because that I think is where we're really stalling out, whether that's the Ed world or in other factions too. It's that whole Lone Ranger thing that we have to kill that baby there. We have to kill that little ghoul, whatever.
Yeah.
It's not serving us, because if as long as that continues, we're gonna have people flopping around with Gadsden flags and then going home in a couple hours, because that's what your Lone Ranger gets you.
That's exactly right. I love that visual. And where can people find more and connect with you and, you know, see more of your work and all of that good stuff? Where would you like to direct them?
On BitChute, there's the channel for the college, Buckus to Stacy's Institute, on YouTube as well. I think if you just type in John Coleman, Buckus to Stacy's, maybe you can put the link in the description, Lindsay.
Yes.
There's that. If you're interested in studying at the school, we take students of about 15 years in age and up, and we have, all the way up there. You can go to Buckus to Stacy's Institute.wordpress.com. And if you're interested in correspondence on the school or on this topic or on naturism or on education or on the price of tea in China, you can write me at Buckus to Stacy's Institute at AOL.com.
Awesome. And I know we've shared so much and you've given us so many wisdom nuggets, but I always have to ask if you have any final thoughts or words of wisdom you want to leave people with.
Oh, golly. The final thing I would say is try to see the pathos in this as soon as anything else, including in those who've given themselves over to the agenda. Mr. Biden himself is a great example of this, I think. Here is a man who has, I don't know if people realize that man's career. I think most people probably in the last 10 years maybe began to pay attention to him. But I mean, this is a guy who's thrown his greatest thing in life was wanting to become president. He's run like 3-4 times. Yeah. And there's in that man, I see almost a centerpiece or a sacramental or a motif, if you like, of the agenda. So here's a man who's given out all his principles, doesn't have a legitimate thing to him. And almost like in Shakespeare or like Tales from the Crypt, or maybe more apropos, here's a man who has gotten what he wants. That's the worst part about it. Yeah. And now he is led around in a haze by a woman who can't wait for him to die. And there's something beyond the comedy of it, the tragicomedy. There's something genuinely pathetic in this. And I see in that man really the state of those who have sold out to this scheme. I just see the pathos of it all.
It's very well encapsulated. It's a super good symbol for all of that we have talked about this whole episode and more, and I haven't really seen it that way until you presented it as such, so thank you for that. And fellow travelers of the path, it is a beautiful thing. This has been your analog electric concentric dose of wisdom according to the mentally armed guardian, John Coleman. John, thank you so much for all that you do and for being here tonight.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. It's been a blast.
Awesome. Truth is not relative. Truth exists as an absolute and an objective state, and that makes it exceedingly rare and hard won. Those who would claim a truth that can be so easily poked through with constellations of exposed fallacy steal more than elections. They steal the fabric of reality, the soul of the world, and all that we hold dear. Solipsism is not a state we can progress through in order to reach higher states of being or even basic comfort and decency, let alone a semblance of order and cohesiveness. If we aim to live together as communities of people aimed towards progress and growth, lying liars and the lies they tell must be exposed constantly. This does not divide us left or right, good and bad. This is an identityless stance of simplicity that the truth matters always. Hold it in your heart, but also scream it from the rooftops and whisper it in the aisles, and until you utter nothing but that sweetest of ambrosias called truth, travel well, aim for balance, and always look inside first. Mwah.
Domestic terrorists.
They're not wearing masks.
Domestic terrorists. It's that basic, it's that simple.
And the question is, how are we going to really almost deprogram these people?
These extremists, authoritarians, fascists, bigots, racists, nativists, even libertarians.
They're not wearing masks.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories. Oversensitize them to what we have to do.
Potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist.
We've made it our mission to limit the spread of this disease and to limit the risks to lives and to our economy. We've been clear from the beginning that getting together in groups outside of your household that is not permitted is not allowed.
And we need to make it clear to them that the vaccine is the ticket back to pre-pandemic life. And the window to do that is really narrowing.
This nation, this idea called America, was and always will be a new world. Our new world.
Today we're taking steps to confront not just the gun crisis, but what is actually a public health crisis.
They're not wearing masks.
You know the old expression about snitches? Well, in this case, snitches get rewards. We want to thank you for turning folks in and making sure we are all safe.
Are you proposing taking away their guns, and how would this work? I am.
I'ma have a lava lamp in my